The High Court of Zalari stood as a testament to the Empire's millennia of dominance. Towering spires of obsidian and gold stretched beyond sight, shimmering under artificial stars. Inside, beneath the glimmer of crystal chandeliers, Princess Arya Zelvorin sat upon the throne she never wanted. Her expression remained composed, though boredom clawed at the edges of her patience. Before her, yet another suitor stood, armored in ceremonial silver, his violet skin reflecting the light like polished stone. He was the overmind of the Vshari, a species of pure telepathic consciousness, their intelligence spanning countless linked minds. His voice echoed in her skull, silken and invasive. Princess Arya, your hesitation is illogical. My mind encompasses 1,000 strategies, 1,000,000 lifetimes of knowledge. Together, we would be unstoppable. Arya tilted her head, unimpressed. If I married you, would I still have my own thoughts? A pause. A flicker of hesitation. The answer was obvious. The Vshari had no concept of individuality. We would think as one, he admitted. Arya's lips curled slightly. Then I have no use for you. A murmur rippled through the court, but Arya had long since stopped caring. The suitor glared, his psychic presence withdrawing like a tide. He bowed stiffly and left. The moment he was gone, a new figure stepped forward. A Krull warlord, his reptilian frame encased in biometallic armor that pulsed with artificial muscle fibers. His voice was a guttural growl, his posture a promise of war. I have conquered 5 star systems in your name, he declared. Marry me, and I will lay the galaxy at your feet. Arya exhaled softly, her fingers tapping against the gilded armrest. I could marry a brute and rule with fear, or I could rule alone without shackles. The Krull snarled. Without strength, your empire will crumble. Perhaps, she mused, eyes cold, but I will not shackle myself to a man who measures worth in blood. The warlord's nostrils flared, but he did not dare defy her ruling. One by one they had come, and one by one they had failed. Arya had turned away the galaxy's finest warriors, telepaths, immortals, and yet none had given her reason to reconsider. Her advisors fidgeted. They had tolerated her defiance for years, but time was slipping away. Soon she would have no choice but to decide. That was when the anomaly appeared. A quiet chime rang in the chamber, and Arya turned as her personal AI, Vera, materialized as a flickering hologram. The court fell silent. Vera did not interrupt without cause. An unknown vessel has entered Zalari-controlled space, Vera reported. Arya raised a brow. Another suitor? Unlikely. The ship bears human insignia. The court erupted into whispers. A human? Here? The very idea was laughable. Humanity was insignificant, a young species weak, limited in both lifespan and power. They had neither the psionic might of the Vshari nor the technological supremacy of the Zalari. Arya, however, felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Interest. Bring them to me, she commanded. It was an unnecessary order. Protocol dictated that any trespassing vessel would be seized, but Arya wanted to see this human herself. Hours later, the High Court doors parted, and the prisoner was brought forward. He was flanked by 2 elite Zalari guards, though he hardly looked like a threat. He was lean, dressed in simple flight gear, his hands bound behind his back. Unlike the suitors before him, he did not bow. He did not kneel. Instead, he stood with an easy arrogance, as though this grand chamber and its countless watching eyes did not intimidate him in the slightest. His gaze met Arya's, and to her utter surprise he grinned. So, he drawled, which one of you is in charge? The room froze. The noble houses had spent years perfecting their posture, their etiquette, their rehearsed humility before the throne. And here was a human, barely more than a galactic upstart, standing before the Princess of Zalari like this was a casual bar conversation. One of the nobles sneered. You stand before Her Imperial Highness, Arya Zelvorin, first of her name, ruler of the Zalari Dominion. Show respect. The human's grin didn't waver. That's a lot of titles. Do you actually need all of them? A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Arya, however, felt something entirely different. Amusement. "Your name?" she asked. "Captain Elias Carter." "And your purpose in my space, Captain Carter?" He shrugged. "Didn't mean to cause a stir. Just passing through." A blatant lie. No one accidentally entered Zalari territory. A dangerous mistake, she mused. Life's full of those. There was something about him. A reckless, unfiltered boldness that none of the other suitors possessed. He wasn't here to impress her. He wasn't here to conquer. He was here because what? Because he felt like it? "Your kind is considered unimpressive," she said, watching his face carefully. "Oh, I know," Elias replied. "Weak, slow, no psionics, no genetic enhancements, just stubborn as hell." She smirked. "You admit it?" "Sure. But tell me something, princess. If we're so unimpressive, why are you interested?" The directness caught her off guard. For years, she had been courted with flowery speeches and extravagant gestures. And yet, here stood a man who simply asked her why she cared. Arya leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "Perhaps because you are the first who does not try to impress me." Elias chuckled, tilting his head. "Then maybe your standards are a little too high." The nobles bristled. One stepped forward, his voice laced with scorn. "A human could never be worthy of our princess." Elias glanced at the noble, unconcerned. "Good thing I wasn't trying to be." Silence. Cold. Unforgiving. And then laughter. Soft at first, then building. Arya was laughing. Genuine, unrestrained amusement. The court had not heard such a sound in years. She stood. "You interest me, Captain Carter. I think I'll keep you." Shock rippled through the chamber. Keep him? What did that mean? Elias only raised a brow. That a good thing or a bad thing? Arya's eyes gleamed. "For now, Captain, it means you live." Guard stepped forward, ready to escort him to his new accommodations. Less a prison cell, more a containment chamber. Arya watched as Elias Carter was led away, his posture still relaxed, his expression unreadable. For the first time in years, she felt anticipation. A human, an anomaly, and perhaps exactly what she had been waiting for. The chamber doors sealed behind him with a whisper of pressurized air, leaving Elias Carter alone in a room that was far too luxurious for a prisoner. The walls were sleek, embedded with faintly glowing circuitry, and the furniture, if he could call it that, was minimal but elegant. No shackles, no dampeners, no interrogation chairs. Just a comfortable seat, a table, and a single viewing screen that displayed a slow, spiraling projection of the Zalari Dominion. He sat down, stretching out with an ease that was more defiant than relaxed. They hadn't beaten him, hadn't tried to break him. That meant they didn't see him as a threat. Yet, the door hissed open. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. The silence was too measured, the presence too controlled. She stepped forward, her movements graceful, but not delicate. She had the gait of someone who had been trained to command, the weight of an empire behind her every step. He glanced up. Didn't think royalty made house calls. Arya Zelvoran studied him, her gaze calculating. "You're not what I expected. Let me guess. You expected a primitive savage? More or less." She took a seat across from him, watching for any sign of discomfort. There was none. "And yet, you seem remarkably at ease." "I've been in worse places." "That is not a compliment to my hospitality." He smirked. Didn't mean it as one. A pause. A measured exchange of silence. "You understand how dangerous your situation is," she said finally. "The Dominion does not tolerate intrusions." "Then why am I still breathing?" That was the question, wasn't it? She had executed spies for less. A human, alone, entering her space without permission. Logic dictated he should have been eliminated before even setting foot in her court. She leaned forward slightly. "Because you interest me." He held her gaze, something flickering behind his eyes. An awareness, a sharpness that wasn't just reckless bravado. "You've had suitors from every corner of the galaxy," he said. "Strongest, smartest, most advanced. And yet, you're sitting here talking to a guy with none of that. Why? Arya smiled, slow and knowing. Because you are the first man who has not tried to convince me that I need him. His expression didn't change, but she caught the faintest shift. The realization that she had him figured out just as much as he had her. You mistake apathy for confidence, he said. Do I? He exhaled, shaking his head. All right, princess. You got me here. What now? Now, she said, standing. I decide what to do with you. The door opened again, and 2 guards stepped inside. Unlike before, they weren't here to escort him gently. Enjoy your stay, Captain Carter. And with that, she left. Time passed. He didn't count the hours, but he felt them stretch. The room remained the same, silent, untouched. But he knew better than to believe he was alone. They were watching, studying, testing him. Fine, let them watch. When the door opened again, it wasn't a royal visit. It was an interrogation. The Zalari official who entered was taller than most humans. His features sharp, eyes black as deep space. His uniform was crisp, but his posture was predatory. Captain Carter. Interrogation time already? Thought we'd have dinner first. The official didn't react. You are an anomaly. Humans are insignificant, weak, yet you walk into our space with no fear. Why? Elias shrugged. Guess I didn't get the memo. You think this is a joke? No. I think you don't know what to do with me. The official's jaw tightened. Your species lacks power. You lack strategy. You lack anything that would justify your arrogance. And yet, here I am. The official exhaled sharply. We have analyzed your ship. It is outdated. Unimpressive. Good thing I wasn't trying to impress you. You act as though you are untouchable. Elias leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. No. I act like someone who knows exactly what he's worth. And that bothers you, doesn't it? Silence. A dangerous one. Then the official stood. You will learn your place soon enough. Elias watched him leave, exhaling slowly once the door shut again. They weren't used to this. To someone who wasn't playing by their rules. Good. Another visit. This time it was Arya again. She didn't sit. You're causing quite a stir, she said. He grinned. That's kinda my thing. She tilted her head. Tell me, Captain, if you knew entering Zalari space would get you into this situation, why do it? For the first time, the smirk faded. Not entirely, but just enough for her to see past it. I was looking for something, he admitted. What? He hesitated, then chuckled to himself. Something worth sticking around for. She studied him carefully. And did you find it? Still figuring that out. A long pause. Then, to his surprise, she extended a hand. Come with me. He raised a brow. Not to a cell this time? She didn't answer, just waited. After a moment he stood, taking her hand. She led him out, past the guards who had once been ready to break him, into the vast corridors of the palace. And for the first time since he'd arrived, Elias Carter felt something strange. Curiosity. The palace was unlike anything Elias had ever seen. The architecture was impossibly sleek, a fusion of technology and artistry that made human designs look primitive by comparison. The walls pulsed with a faint, rhythmic glow, as if the very structure was alive. It was a city unto itself, sprawling and endless, filled with towering halls and whispering corridors. Arya walked ahead of him, her pace steady but unhurried. No guards, no chains, just the two of them moving through the heart of an empire that should have crushed him the moment he arrived. You're giving me a tour now? He asked, glancing at the shifting structures around them. I'm showing you why your presence here is a paradox, she replied. The Zalari Dominion has thrived for millennia. Our technology surpasses that of every known civilization. Our genetic lineage is unparalleled. And yet, for all our advancements, we have never encountered a species like yours. He smirked. A species like mine? You mean a bunch of stubborn, short-lived idiots? She stopped, turning to face him. A species that refuses to acknowledge its limitations. He met her gaze, the weight behind her words settling in. He had always known humans were the underdogs of the galaxy. No psionics, no grand genetic modifications, no biological immortality. Just grit. And somehow that was enough to unnerve an empire that had stood for thousands of years. Arya continued walking. He followed. You rejected every suitor before me, he said. And now you're spending all this time on one random human. What's your angle, princess? She glanced at him. You assume I have one? Everyone has an angle. A small, knowing smile. Then perhaps I am still deciding yours. They reached a vast, open chamber lined with transparent panels that overlooked the capital city. Below, endless structures stretched toward the horizon, interconnected by shimmering pathways of energy. Zalari ships moved in synchronized patterns, their designs elegant and precise. A civilization at its peak. A dominion that had never known true weakness. Elias leaned against the railing. So what happens now? You keep me around until you get bored? Toss me in a lab to study? If I wanted to dissect you, I would have done so already. Reassuring. She watched him carefully. You intrigue me because you do not behave as you should. Every species that stands before the Zalari does so with fear or reverence. You show neither. He shrugged. Maybe I'm just bad at respecting authority. She tilted her head. Or maybe you understand something we do not. He raised a brow. And what's that? That power is not the same as strength. That made him pause. He had expected arrogance, superiority, the same condescension he had seen from every major galactic power. Instead, she was analyzing him like a puzzle she couldn't solve. Most species that encounter the Dominion seek one of two things, she continued, to challenge us, or to serve us. You do neither. Didn't realize those were my only options. For most, they are. Silence stretched between them, the weight of unspoken thoughts filling the space. Elias finally exhaled. Look, princess, I didn't come here to start some intergalactic debate about power and strength. I came here because I was looking for something worth sticking around for. And have you found it? His gaze flickered to her, a question buried beneath his usual smirk. Still figuring that out. She didn't press. Instead, she turned back toward the city, her expression unreadable. The court expects me to choose a consort soon, she said after a moment. He raised a brow. And you think a human's gonna make the list? Her lips curled slightly. Perhaps. It was the closest thing to a challenge he had heard since stepping onto this planet. And for the first time, he realized something. She wasn't looking for a ruler. She wasn't looking for power. She was looking for something real. Something different. And maybe, just maybe, she had finally found it. Elias stood at the edge of the balcony, watching the Zalari capital shift and pulse like a living entity. The city's towering spires gleamed under the artificial twilight, each structure a testament to millennia of technological supremacy. It should have been awe-inspiring, humbling even, but he had spent too much time being unimpressed by things that were supposed to intimidate him. Arya stood beside him, her presence as measured as always. She carried herself like someone who had never known uncertainty, but he had spent enough time around soldiers and leaders to recognize the signs. She was weighing something, calculating. You haven't asked me to leave, he said. I have not. That mean you've made up your mind? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked over the city, her gaze distant. The court sees my refusal to choose a consort as a weakness, she said finally. To them, leadership is only valid if it is shared. Strength must be reinforced. Sounds like they just want to control whoever sits next to you. Perhaps. He turned to face her fully. So, what happens if you pick no one? She exhaled, something close to frustration crossing her expression. Eventually, the decision will be made for me. His smirk was dry. Doesn't sound like much of a choice. No, it is not. A moment passed between them, the hum of the city below the only sound. You still haven't answered my question, he said. She glanced at him. Have you made up your mind? She studied him, the weight of her decision clear in her silence. Then, she turned, walking away from the balcony. Come. He followed, not because he had to, but because something in the air told him this was the moment everything shifted. They entered a vast chamber, different from the others. It was older, the designs etched into the walls more intricate, more deliberate. The throne at the center was not just a seat, it was a declaration, a place meant for someone who ruled not just with authority, but with purpose. She stopped in front of it, looking at him once more. "Do you understand why I find you difficult, Elias Carter? Because I don't bow?" A small smile. "Because you do not belong here, and yet you do not seem out of place." He folded his arms. "And what does that mean for you?" "It means," she said, stepping closer, "that the choice I make now will change everything." He met her gaze, unflinching. "Then make it." Silence. A breath. A moment suspended in time. Then finally she spoke. "The court expects me to choose a ruler," she said. "But I will not." He raised a brow. "So what's your play, princess?" She exhaled, as if settling something within herself. "I will choose an equal." The words hung between them, charged with meaning. He let them sink in before responding. "That's a dangerous move." She nodded. "It is." He smirked. "Then I guess I'm in." A shift. A decision. The future of an empire altered in a single breath. And Elias Carter, the lone human who was never meant to be here, had just become part of something far bigger than himself.